Welcome back, Course 2, to the Kaloran Show. We are on Lesson 85 today, Algebraic Terms. We are going to be discussing the order of operations and how we can break our terms up and make it easier for us to solve the problem. So, we will start with our first step, and this is something we would have already seen this year. So we're going to be simplifying this, and then I'm going to show you how to break it up into separate terms. So here we go. We have a -2 over here. We're going to rewrite that. In the middle, our order of operations tell us parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So we are going to do just that. We have parentheses, which are already simplified, no exponents, moving on to multiplication, which is right there. So our multiplication gives us a -2 times a -2, which is a, oh, you almost got me, a +4. Over here we have division next. So we're going to look at this division problem. We will keep our subtraction sign. -2 divided by a +2. Negative divided by a positive is a negative, and a 1. So now we have our three numbers that we need to continue to work with. We are done with our multiplication and division, so we can cross those steps off. All we have left is addition and subtraction. So we're going to go through and make sure we're adding everything. Yes, there we are adding. Boo, not adding. So we need to change this to addition. How we do that is by adding the opposite of the number next to it. So we are changing our -1 to a +1. And now we are adding. Woo! Let's combine our like signs, because that makes our job, my job, a lot easier. So here we have like signs. They are both positives. A 4 and a 1 are going to make a +5. And out in front here, we are going to create that. Remember, we can add in any order because of the commutative property when we're adding. We have a -2 and a +5 over here, and they are different signs. Okay, so when we have different signs, we are going to subtract, and we are going to get a 3, and that is going to give us a positive because our larger number is positive. So our solution was a +3. And what you didn't know is that doing that, we have already started to separate and isolate terms. Right here by this addition sign, we separated and said this term is different than this one. And by our negative sign or our subtraction sign, we also separated there and said we have stuff to do before we can do that. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Before we get started, we just need to talk about a few rules. Adding, important. Okay? Pause your video and write down everything you know about adding numbers, because guess what? We don't subtract in Mrs. Kaloran's class. And I know you waited for a really long time, because adding, when we have same sign numbers, that means we are going to add the absolute value of the numbers, and your second step, take the sign of both numbers. Do you have to write down everything I am saying? No, but you need to write down the important things. And this is an important thing, important fact in math. The only other thing you could have when adding, because you have changed everything from subtraction to addition, is different signs. And when you have different signs, you are going to, you guessed it, or knew it, subtract the absolute value of the numbers. And that will bring you to the last step, which means to take the sign of the largest absolute value number. Okay, those are your rules for addition and adding. Make sure you don't forget those. The only other rule we can talk about is when we multiply and divide. Okay, remember when we multiply, same sign, and divide, I should say. Same sign equals positive. Different sign equals negative. Okay? Important rules we need to know before we move on. So, write those down. I'm moving on. You can pause your video. I can't. So, in the next problem, simplify each term, then combine the terms. So, first step is to separate the terms. So, anytime you see subtraction where there isn't any form of grouping, so like this sign right here, no grouping between this term and that term. So, they are two separate terms, so we're going to separate. Over here, you see this plus sign, which is separating another two terms. So, we need to separate our terms, and then we're going to simplify. Okay, so this is our first step, which is our given. So always remember to include justifications for what you're doing, especially if Mrs. Florin asks you to. So we're going to do our first term in red. So our first term says we need to take this -3 and it needs to be evenly distributed into those two numbers. So we end up with a -6 plus 4 because we have a negative times a positive, which gives you a negative, and a negative times a negative, which gives you a positive. Okay, there's our first term that we have separated. Is it completely simplified? No. So now we need to add. So -6 plus 4 is going to give you 6 minus 4, which is 2. Take the sign of the larger number. In the next step, which I will use blue for, okay, don't forget that our green stuff stays the same. We have a minus, and we have a plus, and we have a minus, and we have a plus. They come down with us. And here we're going to be doing only multiplication. In between there is all multiplication. So the first one we're going to do is this multiplication. 4 times a -2, which is a -8. And we're still multiplying by that -3, which gives us a positive 24, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And the last term back here we need to simplify. So the first thing we're going to do is always simplify our numerator first. -3 times a -4 is a positive 12. And we still have that division by 2 in the bottom. Positive 12 divided by 2 is going to be a positive 6. Okay, now that you have all of your terms simplified, we can begin to add and subtract from left to right. Okay, so we did a lot of different steps in here. Okay, if we were working on our own and we had to justify, we would need to make sure that each of those steps were done separately so we could write down all the steps that were happening. Down here we're going to have a -2. We need to change to a plus a negative, so that we are adding all of these terms. You can now see that we have a negative sign and a negative sign. Let's combine those, and we will get a -26, and over here a positive 6. So now you can see different signs. If we have different signs, we are going to take the absolute value and we are going to subtract. So 26 minus 6 is 20. And then you look out front here at your negative, and that is with the larger number. So our solution is going to be a -20. Go through, check your steps, make sure you are right. Okay? Mrs. Florin can be wrong sometimes too. Simplifying the next one will bring you to separating terms. Notice that these are braces. Those are symbols of inclusion. So that whole thing right there is one term. So we're going to separate it from that -2 out in front. So we will rewrite our -2 and we'll rewrite our subtraction. And then we're going to simplify in here. Okay, so we have a -3, -4, and a -5 make a positive 20. Okay, so there is your first step. Have we simplified our entire term? That would be your next question, and you would say no. So we need to, negative 3 minus 20, add the opposite, okay? And when we add the opposite, this number and this number have the same sign. So now we get a negative 23, negative 2 in front. You can now see that this can no longer be simplified. We've done everything we can do. The only problem is we're subtracting. Mrs. Florence says no subtracting. So add your opposite. And there you are going to add the opposite, negative 2 plus a positive 23. They are different signs. 23 plus 2. Here is a negative. Absolute value, both of the numbers. And we are going to subtract. 23 minus 2 is 21. And we are going to take the sign of the larger number. So your solution would be 21. I think that was enough work for today. What do you guys think? Do we need to do the last one? Let's have you try that one on your own. Okay, so write that down in your notebooks. As well as you can pause, practice set problems and bring those to class on your day that it is due. I know that this was a rather informative video, so make sure you get everything written down that needs to be written down and any questions you may have. Thank you for joining the Kaloran Show, and I'm sure your day can only get better.